On my birthday, my daughter-in-law looked me straight in the eye and said, "This house isn't yours anymore. You're just a guest, if that." I stood there, holding a bottle of wine no one would drink, a card no one would read, and a quiet hope I should have buried years ago. The front door didn't slam. It clicked shut. Soft, final, practiced, like they'd rehearsed it. Inside, through the frosted glass, I saw balloons. Streamers. The same dining table I built with my own hands was now covered with store-bought cakes and branded party favors. And there he was, my grandson, blowing out candles while everyone clapped. Everyone except me, because I wasn't invited. I watched my own son laugh beside his in-laws, like they were the ones who held him through every night he cried over broken math grades and first heartbreaks. Like they were the ones who lent him their car so he could propose. Like I had never existed. They saw me. I know they did. My silhouette cast long against the porch light, the same porch I laid brick by brick when they couldn't afford a contractor. But no one came to the door. I wasn't expecting a speech or a hug, just acknowledgement, a nod, a moment. Something to tell me I wasn't a ghost in my own bloodline's celebration. But they had already deleted me, not with cruelty, but with silence, which over time becomes its own kind of violence. I sat on the front steps for a while, listening to muffled music and distant laughter, remembering the first time I walked into this house with my late wife. She had said, "This place will hold generations." She didn't know that sometimes what you build becomes your own prison. They think I'm just the old man who keeps showing up. But what they forget is that my name is still on the title. That roof? Those walls? That backyard where my grandson now plays with kids who don't know who I am? They stand because I made them stand. And while they erased me from their memories, they forgot the one place my name still lives. In ink. In law. On the deed they never bothered to read. I rose to my feet, brushed the dust from my coat, and walked back to the gate. Not with sadness, but with something sharper. Resolve. Because this isn't just about a house. It's about the moment a man realizes he was never just visiting. He was the foundation. And foundations don't beg to be remembered. They just wait for everything above them to learn what happens when you forget what you're standing on. Friends, let me take a quick pause here. Would you mind sharing in the comments? Where are you listening from? And have you ever gone through something similar in your own life? Your stories matter, truly. If this moment touched you, consider subscribing and sharing this video with someone who might need it. By doing that, you're not just helping this channel grow, you're helping more voices be heard, more stories be told. Now, let's continue. It came on a Sunday. 3 words. Don't come over. No explanation. No softened edge. Just a command, cold-clipped, calculated. I stared at the screen for a long time. It was from my daughter-in-law, but it might as well have come from all of them. From my son. From the family I once held together like mortar between bricks. I paid for that phone. Not to own her, but to help. In the early days when they were struggling with bills and rent, I stepped in, quietly, without asking for anything in return. I never wanted power, only presence. But now even that was too much. Apparently my presence made things awkward. Apparently I was too old-fashioned. Apparently they needed space. It's strange how rejection doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives in lowercase letters, glowing quietly on a phone screen, stealing your breath before you realize it. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't have words, but because anything I said would be used against me, twisted into more proof that I was the problem, that I was too involved, too emotional, too much. I sat in my kitchen for hours that day. The same kitchen where I once peeled apples for my grandson, where we made pancakes in lopsided shapes and laughed like time didn't matter. I remember how his small hands would reach for mine, sticky with syrup, and say, "Don't go yet, Grandpa." Now they wanted me gone. And not in the final funeral sense. They wanted me gone while I still breathed. Do you know how painful it is to outlive your welcome in a home you helped build? To be told you're too much by people who were once too small to even stand without your hand? To realize that you're not just being pushed away, you're being erased, deliberately, one layer at a time. And yet I didn't scream, didn't plead, didn't show up unannounced to prove a point. No, I let the silence settle, let the space they asked for stretch into weeks. But every time I walked past the mirror, I didn't see an old man with outdated views. I saw the man who handed his son the keys to that house, the man who took a second job to pay off their wedding, the man who stayed quiet when the jokes turned sharp and the invitations stopped coming. I wasn't perfect, but I never abandoned them. They chose distance, so I gave it. But in the quiet that followed, I started remembering what they forgot. I am not a guest. I am part of the very ground they walk on. And when you erase a name from your lips but not from the deed, eventually the ground speaks back, and it remembers everything. It started with a photo, a simple one, taken in the backyard I leveled myself years ago when they couldn't afford a landscaper. The grass looked greener now. The fence was freshly painted. But what caught me off guard wasn't the setting. It was who wasn't in the picture. Me. I remembered that day vividly. It had been my grandson's 3rd birthday. I arrived early to help hang decorations. I'd grilled burgers in the corner, taking careful turns so the smoke wouldn't reach the kids. I took photos with my son. I held my granddaughter on my shoulders so she could blow bubbles into the sky. I was there. I was part of it. But now, scrolling through my daughter-in-law's page, I saw the same day from a different world. I was missing. There they were, smiling, celebrating, arms around each other. But the angle was too perfect, too tight, cropped, reframed, as if someone had carefully drawn a line where I had once stood, then cut me out with the precision of someone who had rehearsed it. I searched through more posts, pictures from holidays I used to host, dinners I paid for, vacations I helped fund. My chair at the table was always occupied, just never by me, and if I ever appeared at the edge of a frame, I was conveniently blurred, or replaced by a well-placed plant, or just absent. Pixel by pixel, they were rewriting history. It's a strange kind of grief, the grief of being erased while still alive. Not mourned, not missed, just omitted. I sat alone that evening, phone in hand, scrolling through memories that no longer belonged to me. In one post, my son wrote, "Family is everything." The irony hit like a punch to the ribs. I was family, I am family. But it seems their definition had been edited too. They use the word legacy often in their captions. Legacy dinners, legacy traditions, legacy values. But legacy isn't hashtags or photo filters. Legacy is the calluses on your hands from laying tile. The early mornings spent fixing broken steps so your son wouldn't trip with his child in his arms. Legacy is the envelope you quietly slipped into their mailbox when the car insurance was overdue. Legacy is inconvenient to those who want the reward without the reminder. That night, I pulled out an old photo album, the real kind, with worn corners and sticky plastic sheets. I flipped through images they'd forgotten, because they lived in a world where you can delete what you no longer want to remember. But I couldn't be deleted from these pages. There I was, covered in paint while holding a baby bottle. There I was, holding my wife's hand beneath the newly built archway. There I was, standing beside my son on his graduation day, my eyes full of pride, his full of possibility. No crop could erase that. No caption could rewrite the truth. They thought silence would make me disappear. That distance would render me irrelevant. That edited images could replace real presence. But while they deleted my face from their timelines, they forgot where my name remains. Etched into the contract, printed on the deed, secured in the foundation of every memory they built on top of mine. They may not see me in their stories anymore, but I haven't gone anywhere. I'm still here, and so is the truth. It wasn't just the photos, it was the stories, the way they began to retell their lives as if I had never existed at all. I heard about it first, through a friend of the family, someone who had been at one of their dinner parties. She tried to sound casual, but I could hear the unease in her voice. They were talking about how hard it was for them starting from scratch, how proud they are to have done it all without help. Without help. That phrase sat in my chest like a stone. I remembered the nothing they claimed to have started from. I remembered the late nights doing their laundry in our basement when their apartment's machines broke. I remembered selling my vintage watch, my last connection to my father, just to cover their closing costs when they were short on the down payment. I remembered sleeping on the floor of my own house for weeks, so they could have the master bedroom when their baby came early. I remembered building the second floor with my bare hands, one beam at a time, while my back screamed and my bank account wept. I didn't do it for praise. I didn't even expect thanks. I did it because that's what fathers do when their children need a future. But now, That future had no trace of me in it. They told stories over wine glasses and centerpieces about how they clawed their way up, how no one ever handed them anything, and how proud they were of being self-made. Their friends applauded, toasted to their resilience, and I became a footnote too inconvenient to mention. They hadn't forgotten me. They'd revised me. Because to include me would mean admitting they didn't do it alone, that behind every proud decision stood a quiet man with tired hands and a heart full of unspoken sacrifices. A man who gave without asking, who never demanded space at the table but built it anyway. Truthfully, I didn't want credit. I wanted connection. But they replaced gratitude with pride. And pride, when left unchecked, rewrites the truth in its own image. One night I sat alone at the kitchen table with an old folder of receipts and blueprints, the original plans I drew when we decided to renovate the house for them. My handwriting still covered the margins. Add storage for baby. Leave room for staircase in case they grow. Make sure insulation keeps nursery warm. It was all still there. The proof. But proof means little in a world that values stories over facts. And the story they told was clean, marketable, inspiring. A young couple who rose from the ashes, who beat the odds, who built their dream with their own hands. Except the ashes weren't theirs. They were mine. And the hands that bled first were mine too. But I said nothing. Not yet. Because sometimes truth doesn't need to interrupt. It waits. And when it speaks, it doesn't need a microphone. It just needs the right moment. They thought they were writing their legacy. But they forgot I still hold the first chapter. And no story lasts long when it's built on a lie. The silence of the holidays hits differently when you remember what they used to sound like. Years ago, this house, my house, would echo with the sound of wrapping paper tearing, children laughing, the buzz of the oven working overtime to keep up with my wife's endless trays of cookies. The tree always stood in the same corner, where the morning light hit just right. Ornaments we'd collected over decades, each one a memory. A baby's first Christmas, a wedding year, the little clay handprint from my son when he was 4. Now, the corner was empty. The tree I had dragged out of the attic alone sat undecorated. The lights were still in the box, because no one was coming, again. It began slowly over the years, first with, we're spending this year with her side of the family, and then, the kids are getting too old for the drive. Eventually, the excuses stopped being explanations and started becoming declarations. This year, they didn't even bother to pretend. No invite, no call, no card. Christmas morning came and went, with only the quiet hum of the refrigerator to keep me company. I placed one wrapped gift under the unused tree, labeled to my grandson, from Grandpa. Not because I believed he'd receive it, but because I needed to believe that someone, someday, would know I still tried. Later that afternoon, I took a short walk, mostly to clear my head. That's when I passed the neighbor's yard. The same neighbor who'd always waved at me like I was a fixture on the street. She was setting up for her own family's celebration, and smiled apologetically when she saw me. "I saw your grandkids today," she said softly. "They were at your son's place. Looked like a full house." I smiled back. But my chest did something else entirely. They were just across town, not on vacation, not traveling, just celebrating somewhere I wasn't welcome. It wasn't the distance that hurt, it was the decision, the choice to let the day pass like I didn't exist. I walked home slowly, watching the sun begin to set over a yard I used to shovel so my grandson wouldn't slip. I thought about the decorations I used to hang from the roof, even after my back started giving me trouble, all for the joy on their faces. I thought about the Christmas where my wife and I stayed up until 2 a.m., building a toy train set so it would be perfect for our son when he woke up. I thought about the Father's Day, when he was 10 and brought me a paper tie covered in glue and glitter that said, "Best dad in the universe." Now? Not even a text. Not even a lie to soften the blow. And yet, I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because the tears had already carved their path too many times before. I sat at the edge of the bed that night and stared at the ceiling. And I realized something. They hadn't forgotten me. They chose to remove me. There's a difference. Forgetting is an accident. Erasure is an act. It's a knife disguised as absence. But they forgot something important in their rewrite. The house where their laughter now echoes on holidays they no longer share with me, still stands on a title with my name on it, still rests on the sacrifices they no longer speak of. They can delete me from dinners. They can crop me out of photos. but they can't remove the foundation beneath their feet, not without feeling the crack. When it finally decides to speak back. I found the courage one gray morning to bring back a piece of what once was. Under my arm, I carried 3 carefully wrapped packages: a wooden train set I'd carved by hand, a stack of handwritten cards, one for each grandchild, and a framed photograph of the 4 of us taken in this very living room on my wife's birthday last year. The picture still held her smile, soft and warm, gently reminding me of the laughter that once filled these halls. I placed the gifts on the porch, arranging them neatly, as if placing beacons of hope, a promise that I was still here, still loving them, still believing we could find our way back. I paused at the gate, my hand resting on the rusted latch, imagining their surprise when they saw my small offering. I wondered if the cards, the ones filled with memories of bedtime stories, kitchen dance parties, and secret handshakes, might thaw even a fraction of the chill that had settled between us. By mid-afternoon I walked past the porch again, my heart fluttering with anticipation. The packages were gone. My breath caught. Had they brought them inside? Were they reading the cards now? Were we about to talk? My footsteps quickened as I climbed the few steps. The garbage bin sat at the side of the driveway. Its lid was shut, as if nothing unfortunate had ever been tossed inside. I lifted the lid with trembling fingers and found my gifts: crumpled wrappers, broken toy wheels, a glass frame shattered. The cards lay in the bottom corner, wet and torn, edges stained with rain and neglect. I felt the world tilt. My phone buzzed then, the screen lighting up with a message from my daughter-in-law. Please respect our boundaries. 2 words, 6 syllables, wielded like a final blow. No apology, no explanation, no room for my grief. The words perched between us, solid and immovable, cutting deeper than any knife. I stood there, the garbage bin's metal cold against my legs, and felt a strange mix of fury and sorrow. Fury that they treated my love like trash. Sorrow for a family fractured beyond simple repair. I thought of the nights I lay awake, haunted by dreams of bridging this gap, of hearing my grandson call my name again. All those prayers, all that longing swept away like umbrella stand detritus. In that moment, I realized this was more than rejection. It was a declaration. They weren't asking me to stay away. They were demanding it. My presence, my love, my history, all unwelcome. And for the first time I understood. Pleading would get me nowhere. Begging would only reinforce their resolve to push me further out of their story. So I did the hardest thing I've ever done. I walked away, not with anger, but with acceptance. I left the shattered frame and torn cards behind and turned my back on the house I built. Not forever, at least not yet. But for now, because sometimes letting go of what you love most is the only way to discover what comes next. I walked down the street, feeling the weight lift, even as grief pressed on my chest. And though they asked for distance, I realized I didn't need to cower. I could choose my own space. I could honor myself. In their final act of erasure, they gave me permission to stand free. The boundary they set was clear. Their family, their rules, but my life, my heart, remained unbroken. I carried on, not as a ghost haunting their memories, but as a man who knows his worth. And somewhere in the quiet after the storm, I felt the first stirrings of something new, a promise to myself that whatever came next, I would never again wait by a door that wouldn't open. The news came on a rain-soaked afternoon, the kind of day when every drop against the window felt like a timer counting down to something irrevocable. I was sorting through a drawer, one I rarely opened, filled with my late wife's pearl bracelet, a stack of faded pension statements, and a handful of grandfathered watches, their faces frozen at the hours I last wound them. Beneath those relics sat the title deed, tucked away as if it, too, belonged to the past. My phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but something in the persistence of that ring stirred a memory. The mornings I spent signing documents to secure their future. The evenings I reviewed loan agreements so they could afford that new roof I insisted on. I picked up. The lawyer's voice was calm, measured. There were no celebratory fireworks in his tone, only firm truth. You're still 50% owner. They can't change that, not without your signature. I stared at the silence between those words. 50%. You could buy a small business with half a stake. You could steer decisions from behind the scenes, unspoken but undeniable. 50% meant more than numbers. It meant acknowledgement. It meant leverage. It meant that every brick I'd laid, every midnight call I'd made to rescue their bank account, every Christmas tree I'd decorated with trembling hands still counted for something real. All these years, I'd assumed my role had dissolved alongside the invitations and the holiday joy stolen from me. I'd let their silence define my worth. But this call, it cracked open a door I'd thought was bolted shut. It reminded me that the law saw what they tried to conceal, that I had power, rightful claim, and a voice they could no longer simply ignore. I closed my eyes and recalled the day I signed that deed. My hand had trembled not out of fear, but out of hope. Hope that this house would shelter generations, that my legacy would endure. It felt sacred then. Now it felt like armor. I took the deed from the drawer, ran my fingers over the embossed letters of my name, and felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in months. Resolve. The watches and pension files shuffled beneath it, tokens of time past, of life built, of sacrifices made. They could no longer sit forgotten beside memories. They demanded their place in the narrative. I didn't celebrate. There was no triumph in cold legal fact. But as the rain hammered the roof, I made a silent vow. I would not be a passive footnote in my own story. I would not allow the walls I'd erected with sacrifice to become a monument to my absence. With that vow came clarity. I would need more than a phone call. I would need a plan, one that balanced justice with dignity. The lawyer promised guidance, but the true work would be mine, reaching back into the past to gather the evidence, the stories, the quiet testimony of every tile laid. I would need to stake my claim not in anger, but in truth. And in that truth lay my path forward. For years, I had given them space, respecting their boundaries even as they redefined them. Now, the boundary lines on paper mirrored a truth they could no longer deny. They might think they had erased me, but ink on parchment is more stubborn than memory, more binding than loyalty, twisted by pride. That night I returned the deed to the drawer. But something had shifted. It no longer felt like buried history. It felt like a lifeline, a reminder that the home they called theirs was only half of what it appeared, and the other half, my half, was ready to speak. They asked me to come over one evening, not for dinner as before, but for a family discussion. The air in their voices was polite, precise, no tremor of remorse, only the chill of obligation. I arrived to find my son sitting at the head of the table, a stack of papers spread before him, the overhead light casting harsh angles across the room I once brightened with laughter. They needed to refinance the mortgage, he explained, their tone clinical. Rates had changed, markets shifted, banks tightened their rules. They wanted to tap into my half of the house, the equity I thought was long buried under silence. Just sign here, he said, sliding a pen across the polished surface. His hand lingered expectantly as if that single gesture could bridge every broken promise, every emptied invitation, every erased photograph. I looked around the room. My daughter-in-law arranged the papers into neat columns, her lips pressed thin. My grandchildren sat quietly on the couch, their eyes wide but confused, too young to comprehend the tension, too old to be shielded completely. The walls were the same ones I'd repaired after last winter's storm. The floorboards still creaked under my boots. Everything else had changed. Sign here, he repeated, voice low. No apology, no I'm sorry, no we missed you. Just necessity, just business, just another reminder that I was more asset than ancestor, more collateral than caregiver. The white envelope arrived next, filled with bank forms and glowing promises of helping out, a script written in their favor disguised as generosity. I felt my chest tighten, breath caught somewhere between heart and throat. The betrayal cut deeper here because it was so blatant. My own blood, asking me to validate their claim, to legitimize their erasure with my signature. To confirm that despite every holiday passed in silence, every gift tossed in the trash, every photo cropped to exclude me, I still belonged only on paper, not in life. No one met my gaze. Their eyes skirted away as I reached slowly for the pen, fingers trembling as if even steel would bend under the weight of this moment. I thought of my late wife, her gentle hands smoothing my hair when I worried the bank would foreclose, her whispered faith that we could weather storms together. I thought of the nights I spent poring over loan documents so they could have a home big enough for new beginnings. Then I remembered that they only wanted half of what I'd given them, half the equity, half the house, half the story. I placed the pen down. The click of its cap felt like a verdict. Silence wrapped the room, heavy and accusing. My son's eyes flicked up, surprise, then anger, before he masked it with controlled calm. "Are you refusing?" he asked. I didn't answer. I stood, the chair scraping against the floor like a funeral bell. I gathered my coat in one motion, left the pen untouched, the papers unsealed. As I walked away, I heard the rustle of their paper dreams unraveling behind me. Outside, the night air was damp and sharp, carrying the promise of rain. I inhaled deeply, feeling the house recede behind me, its lights dimming like a dying ember. I realized then that signing wouldn't save us. It would only cement their conviction that I belonged nowhere but at the bottom of a ledger. They invited me in for a meeting. They wanted my name on the dotted line. But I knew, true ownership isn't proof on paper, it's presence in heart. And they had surrendered that long ago. "I'll think about it," I said, voice steady even as my heart pounded. It was the quietest refusal I'd ever made. No dramatic flourish, no raised fist, just words, weighted with years of unspoken hurt. They watched me, suspended in their own discomfort, as if the volume of my denial would shatter the dishes on the table. But I had already decided, long ago. I thought back to every telltale sign. The unreturned calls, the empty chairs, the neatly cropped images, the way they claimed self-made victories while refusing to acknowledge the hands that laid the first bricks. The way they'd drawn me a chalk outline in their lives and stepped around it, pretending no one noticed the space where my boots once stood. I remembered the sting of giving without recognition, of celebrating their milestones in solitude, of offering forgiveness when none was asked. Each kindness had built a silent ledger of debts they refused to honor. Now they would feel what it was like to draw lines in the dirt and expect the ground to obey. Their faces tightened, the brittle veneer of civility cracking. My daughter-in-law glanced at my son, a shared flicker of fear in their eyes. They'd grown accustomed to compliance, mistaking my patience for weakness. But patience, I realized, can be the calm before a storm. I stood from the table. The chair protested with a groan that echoed my finality. I placed both hands on its back, as though drawing strength from an old friend. "For years I believed that love meant giving everything," I continued, voice unwavering. "But love also means knowing when to protect yourself." Silence filled the room. It was colder now, hollow, as if all the memories we shared had been packed away in cardboard boxes and shipped to some distant warehouse. I reached for my coat and draped it across my arm. As I turned toward the door, I felt something shift inside me, an unfamiliar lightness, like stepping out of someone else's shadow and into my own worth. No words followed. I didn't need to explain further. My departure spoke volumes. Outside, the air was crisp with the promise of change. I walked down the porch steps, each one worn by the weight of my past. Behind me, their home loomed, a monument to what I had built and what they chose to destroy. I paused at the gate, looking back one last time. The lights inside flickered, and for a moment I thought I saw faces pressed against the glass, silent pleas for reconciliation. But then the glow dimmed, and the silhouette of a locked door took their place. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and stepped forward. They had taught me my place. Now, in the quiet of my resolute no, they would learn mine, and I would never again stand in the darkness of their indifference. I would find my own light. They escalated quickly once they realized a polite refusal wouldn't bend me. First came the phone calls, my son's voice tight with frustration, pleading for practicality, reminding me of family. Then my daughter-in-law's messages, sweetly patronizing, reminding me of memories I once shared with them. Guilt seeped in. "Think of the kids," they'd say. We need stability. They tried to paint me as the selfish one, hiding behind concerns for mortgage rates and credit scores. When that failed, they shifted to manipulation. My youngest grandchild's birthday invitation arrived, hand-delivered by a trembling teenager who'd been told it was just a play date. My heart clenched at the sight of the envelope, sealed with a sticker shaped like a heart. But inside wasn't a card from me. It was a printed apology from them, a confession that they might have been harsh. They signed it collectively, as though solidarity and remorse could erase months of erasure. I held the apology letter in my hands, its paper as thin as their convictions. I thought of the countless nights I lay awake worrying about their futures, installing the new water heater so they wouldn't wake to a cold bath, wiring holiday lights so they could celebrate in comfort. All those small sacrifices no one ever mentioned, all those moments no one ever thanked me for. I looked at the apology, then back at the home I built. The walls still carried the echoes of laughter I once brought into every room. The staircase still bore the scratch marks from when their puppy chewed at the steps. The garden still bloomed from the fertilizer I mixed myself, season after season. And in that truth I found my answer. They leaned in when I returned the apology. "Please," my son whispered, eyes glistening, "just be reasonable." My daughter-in-law unloaded another round of concerns, this time about legal troubles, interest rates, and the fear of an endless battle. I took a breath, steady and calm. "If I don't belong in your lives," I said softly, "why should my name belong on your roof?" The room froze. Silence stretched taut as a drawn bow. My words landed heavier than any argument they threw at me. They realized, perhaps for the first time, that their attempt to rewrite our story had consequences far beyond hurt feelings. It challenged the very foundations of their security. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gesture. I simply let the question hang in the air, a mirror reflecting their choices back at them. They had tried to bury me with guilt and remorse and the promise of normalcy. Instead, they discovered that I had found freedom in honesty. They backed away defeated, not by aggression, but by the quiet power of a truth they could not confront. My name on the deed was more than an obligation. It was a testament to every act of love they tried to deny. I gathered my coat and left them in the hush of their own guilt, stepping into the dusk that welcomed me without judgment. Behind me the house stood still, its windows dark, but I knew what lay within its walls. I knew the value of what I'd built, and I knew that no amount of pressure, guilt, or manipulation could erase the bond forged in every brick, every beam, every sacrifice lovingly made. That night, as I walked away, I felt both loss and liberation. They had shown me their coldest intentions, and I had shown them mine, theirs to cling to a story without me, mine to accept that some chapters end not with bitterness, but with clarity, because when the dust settles, the only foundation that matters is the one you stand on with your own 2 feet, and mine were already moving forward. The envelope arrived on a crisp morning, its edges sharp against the porch light, as if it carried the weight of every unsaid word between us. I watched from my car as my son retrieved it, the curious tilt of his head betraying the practiced indifference he'd perfected. He tore it open, scanning the first line, his brow furrowed, then eased into relief until he read the bolded headers. I'd seen that reaction before, the one that begins with a half smile before the realization sets in. Official. Stamped. Served. They'd assumed it was another routine letter, a tax adjustment, a municipal notice, something to fold into old papers and forget. But the words inside carried a different rhythm, one that echoed the slow, steady heartbeat of justice. A notice of sale. Half the property. Mine to release or reclaim. I stood at the edge of the driveway, the morning haze swirling at my ankles, and felt the old pulse of home settle into my chest. This deed wasn't vengeance. It was clarity. A way to hold the mortgage company's gaze and say, "This house stands on more than your current balance. It stands on sacrifice, on love unrecognized, on years of quiet support." Inside, they gathered around the paper like it might dissolve under their stare. Their voices rose in panic, not in anger, an entirely different shade of fear. It struck me then how easily they could summon courage to erase me. But how quickly that courage crumbled when faced with the truth held in black ink and red seal. I didn't need to speak. The rustle of their confusion spoke for me. I watched my daughter-in-law's shoulders tremble as she realized the foundation she stood on wasn't as secure without my consent. My grandchildren peered over shoulders, eyes wide, connecting the dots between the grandfather who fell silent and the paper that roared. The notice offered a choice: release my share, sever the last tie, or reclaim it, insist on my place in this home's future. I folded my arms, feeling the texture of the envelope pressed against my heart. They thought they'd found a loophole in my kindness, but kindness is not weakness. And when you build a home on another's generosity, you learn that the strongest walls are the ones you forget are there, until they hold you up again. That day, the deed reminded us all, property isn't just land and walls. It's the story you refuse to let be rewritten. I turned away, letting the notice settle on their kitchen table, like a verdict they could no longer ignore. And for the first time in years, I felt at peace, knowing that the house I built was finally telling the truth. The panic hit them like a tidal wave, sudden and unstoppable. One moment, life was business as usual. Quiet mornings in the sunlit kitchen, autumn leaves drifting past the windows, and the next, their world convulsed with urgent pleas. My phone buzzed constantly with messages marked urgent, each one more desperate than the last. They weren't asking for understanding or reconciliation. They were begging for shelter from the very consequences they had invited. I saw them in my mind's eye. My son pacing the hallway in tailored slacks, phone pressed to his ear as he negotiated with banks to stall the sale. My daughter-in-law trembling over spreadsheets, recalculating budgets by lamplight, as if numbers alone could erase the truth that lay in red ink on paper. Even the children sensed the change, their laughter cut short by hushed tones and closed doors. They offered me everything: full control of the household budget, a promise to include me again at dinners, vows to post photos honoring Grandpa Day every month. But their words rang hollow, redeemed only by the fear in their eyes. They pleaded not out of love, but out of dread: fear of relocating, fear of uprooting their children, fear of admitting they needed me more than they ever admitted to themselves. I read their emails filled with clauses and contingency plans, each more convoluted than the last. They drafted legal remedies, consulted financial advisors, even considered selling off other assets to buy out my share, all to avoid one hard sentence: that the man they erased still had power over their lives. It was a strange power, rooted not in spite, but in quiet persistence. I didn't brandish anger or wield threats. I simply reminded them, through my silence and presence, that the home they called theirs was built on the foundations of my love and labor. And when foundations are shaken, everything above them trembles. Finally, I wrote back. Not a letter of venom, but a note of calm resolve. I would never jeopardize their welfare, but neither would I surrender my right to be acknowledged. I offered a path forward: genuine reconciliation, marked by mutual respect rather than coerced compliance. I would release my share if, and only if, they invited me back into the story they had tried to rewrite, recognized the sacrifices I made, and promised to honor the truth of our shared history. Their panic deepened as they read my terms. It was no longer about equity or debt. It was about the authenticity they had discarded. In that moment, I watched as fear collided with conscience, and I realized that my quiet strength, the same strength they had dismissed, was now the true tremor beneath their feet, forcing them to reckon with the man they thought they could erase. In their panic, they discovered that the pen I still held was not mightier than love, but it was indelibly inked by a lifetime of devotion they could no longer deny. I asked my grandson to meet me in the old workshop out back, the place where I'd spent countless evenings perfecting wooden carvings and fixing broken toys. He arrived hesitantly, eyes wide with the weight of questions he was too young to fully understand. I guided him to a sturdy workbench, cluttered with tools, and pulled out a rolled-up parchment, its edges frayed with age. "Do you know what this is?" I began softly, unfurling the original blueprint for the house. He shook his head. "I drew this with my own hand before you were born, every room, every window, every beam." I traced the faint pencil lines with my finger, the curved archway in the foyer, the wide back porch where we used to roast marshmallows, the hidden alcove I'd designed for bedtime stories. "Look here," I said, pointing at my signature. "That's me, and not just on paper. This house, it was built for us, together." His breath caught as he leaned in. I showed him where I'd marked special notes. "Keep this wall strong for grandchildren's laughter," and where I'd scribbled dreams of family dinners. "Your mom and dad didn't tell you any of this, did they?" His silence spoke volumes. I handed him an old hammer, still polished from years of use. "I nailed these beams with this. Each strike was a promise that you'd have a place to grow, to play, and to always come home." He turned the hammer over in his small hands, eyes glistening. I placed my hand gently on his shoulder. "Grandpa was never just a guest here, you know. I laid every stone so you could have walls to lean on." He swallowed hard, tears welling. "Why didn't they tell me?" he whispered. There was so much hurt in his voice, betrayal not just of me, but of his own heritage. I sat beside him on a wooden stool, heart aching with both pride and sorrow. "Sometimes grown-ups forget what matters," I explained. "They got caught up in their own stories and lost sight of ours." He nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks. "But you remembered," he said, voice trembling. "You remember everything." We sat in that dusty workshop for a long time, the only sound the distant creak of the house settling. I wrapped an arm around him and squeezed gently, feeling the truth of our bond in every heartbeat. He cried for the lost years, holidays we missed, laughter we'll never get back, moments that slipped away under the weight of silence. Then he looked up at me, determination shining through his tears. "What can I do?" he asked. "How can I help you now?" My chest swelled with a fierce love. "You've already helped more than you know," I said, "just by listening, by knowing the truth. That's the first step toward fixing everything." He nodded, wiping his eyes. Together, we rolled up the blueprint, careful to preserve every line. As we stepped out of the workshop into the fading light, I realized that the real foundation of this house wasn't concrete or timber, but the stories and love we shared. And in that moment, I knew. The next chapter would be written not by erasure or fear, but by truth, by unity, and by the grandson who finally understood whose hands had built the world he called home. They came to me with softened voices and trembling hands, offering envelopes fat with cash, an apology in bills, they said, for my inconvenience. They spoke of rebuilding walls, of crafting new beginnings, of filling the silence with words they should have spoken years ago. There were tears. My daughter-in-law's mascara-streaked cheeks glistened in the afternoon light. My son's shoulders shook as he tried to choke back regret. Their pleas tumbled over each other, desperate symphonies to undo the ache they had caused. I watched them unpack boxes in the living room, their hurried movements punctuated by the hollow click of tape dispensers and rustle of packing paper. Each taped-up carton was a testament to all the nights I'd spent wrapping gifts they'd later discard, to every holiday I'd prepared while they practiced new excuses for my absence. Now they filled boxes with heirlooms, with photographs I'd once taken, with trinkets they thought they no longer needed. They begged me to take the money. "Use it for retirement," they urged. "Please, let us make this right." But I felt the weight of each dollar gnawed at my chest, a reminder that kindness cannot be repaid with currency. They offered promises to include me in decisions, to share more memories, to never let distance grow again. But their words were just echoes of the love they had taught me was conditional, tied to their convenience. I stood in the doorway, watching them dismantle the home we had built together. The walls echoed with the distant hum of a life I once believed we shared. I took a deep breath and let the silence stretch between us, as wide and unyielding as the gap they had opened. Finally I spoke, voice calm but unwavering. "You wanted distance, you got it." Their faces drained of color. A hush fell, broken only by the slow drip of a faucet in the kitchen, an echo of all the clean water I'd installed so their family would never thirst. They faltered, eyes searching mine for some sign of change, of forgiveness, of rescinding the boundary they had so ruthlessly imposed on me. But there was no rescinding. I walked past the boxes, past the trembling hands, and sat in the chair they once used to avoid, its cushion slightly indented with memories of dinners I'd never attend. The seat felt familiar, welcoming, as if it had missed me all along. I settled in and exhaled, feeling the grain of the wood under my fingertips, the solid foundation beneath me. This time, I didn't have to leave. The room filled with their stifled sobs and whispered apologies, but I remained still, a silent sentinel to the truth they could no longer deny. In that chair, surrounded by the evidence of our fractured past, I found a quiet victory. Not in their tears, nor in their money, but in the unshakable knowledge that I had earned my place, whether they chose to see it or not. And as the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting long shadows through the windows, I understood that the final word on this house and on my worth was mine to hold, not on paper, but in the steadfast beat of a heart that refused to be erased. Now I make my home in the back wing of the house I built, once the guest quarters, now my sanctuary of choice. The walls are the same walls that echoed with laughter and arguments, with late-night whispers and holiday carols. The floors still creak underfoot, telling stories in each groan, a testament to every step my family ever took here, whether with love or in contempt. But now there's a purposeful silence. I wake to the soft light slipping through windows I installed myself, and I sip my morning tea where they once told me I didn't belong. I walk past the main hall every day, and I catch their eyes in passing. My son hurriedly gathering his briefcase, my daughter-in-law glossing over a borrowed smile, my grandchildren stealing glances as they rush by. They walk these halls as renters walk corridors, familiar, entitled, unaware of the true history beneath their feet. And I nod. No bitterness stains my greeting, for I have learned that resentment only anchors you to the past. Instead, I meet them with quiet dignity, because walls built on truth don't shatter under the weight of erasure. They stand steady, bearing every memory carved into their grain. Each day, I pass by the framed blueprint in the entryway, my signature still bold in ink. I remember the nights spent by lamplight drafting those lines, the mornings spent by sunrise laying stones. I recall the hands that nailed beams into place, the hands that soothed scraped knees on these very floors. Those memories live here, woven into every joint and joist. They may have thought they could rewrite our story by changing photos and silencing invitations. They may have believed that refusing my presence would sever my claim. But property isn't just land or lumber. It's legacy. It's the love you pour into a home long before contracts and deeds. And legacy, like memory, resists deletion. So while they rent my kindness and inhabit my creation, I own the deeper truth of this place. A reminder that what you build with sacrifice cannot be undone by indifference. And as I settle into the quiet of my wing, I smile softly, knowing the foundation beneath us all remembers. My name remains etched in every corner, not as a footnote, but as the opening chapter. And I have waited patiently for the day everything above these walls finally learned what it means to stand on the ground you cannot erase.